Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Joyner, founder and president of the Village Square. On behalf of the Village Square and Florida Humanities, we're delighted you've joined us tonight for I've Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. This program is part of a multi-year series of digital programs, Unum, Democracy Reignited, presented in partnership with Florida Humanities, exploring the past, present, and future of the American idea as it exists on paper, in the hearts of our people, and as it manifests in our lives. If you're not familiar with the work of Florida Humanities, we're putting their web address in the chat window. Be sure to check them out and learn more about their work. The chat window will be closed tonight, but you can ask questions at any time during the program, and please do by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you haven't taken our anonymous pre-event survey yet, there's still time. If you can take just a moment to do it now, we're dropping the link in the chat thread too. Your honest answers will help the Village Square and our partners with a major nationally scoped research effort to better understand divisions in the United States. Even if you've done the survey for another program, we ask that you complete it again tonight. And we'll ask you to complete it at the end of the program too. That way it's science. I hope you'll take a moment to check out our streaming partners across the country for this evening. They are working hard every single day so that Americans might find each other again. Braver Angels, National Institute for Civil Discourse, Listen First Project, USC, Center for the Political Future, Common Ground Committee, Civic Health Project, Unify, Bridge USA, Citizen Connect, Center for the Humanities at University of Miami, Network for Responsible Public Policy, and our wonderful long-term partners, Tallahassee Democrat and WFSU Public Media. If you want to do your part to support the cause of healthy democracy, you'll get off tonight's Zoom and subscribe or donate to a journalistic endeavor near you that you care about. If local journalism dies, our republic will not be far behind. Finally, thanks to our independent bookstore partners from across the state of Florida who have partnered with us in making Monica's book available to their customers. Midtown Reader in Tallahassee, Tombolo Books in St. Petersburg, and Books and Books in Miami. We're big believers that community connectedness is going to save democracy, so we hope you'll patronize these businesses or an indie bookstore near you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's facilitator, Manu Meel. Protests on the campus of the UCal Berkeley over a planned visit by right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos inspired then Berkeley freshman Manu to establish what has now become Bridge USA, an organization that aims to promote democracy, not partisanship, and now has 43 campus chapters in 19 states. Manu recently was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 in Education. Manu is back by popular demand because he showed all the rest of us up as facilitators. So we thought Manu can do it better. So you need to quit your day job and just facilitate for us, okay?
Liz, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Just a huge thank you to you for all the work that you're doing at Village Square, for all the other partners. Thank you for not firing me the first time and letting me come back on. And I'm especially grateful for this conversation. As you said, we're working with young people across the country, and this book and this conversation is especially important. So thank you, Liz.
Agree completely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so with that, I want to introduce our guest. So this is going to be the first and only time that I look down and read, because our guest, Mónica Guzmán, has such an exemplary and amazing biography, and I want to make sure that we get every part of it. And then we're going to get into conversation. So with that, I want to introduce Mónica Guzmán, who's a senior fellow for public practice at Braver Angels, the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization working to depolarize America, and an amazingly close partner to Bridge USA. She's also the founder and CEO of Reclaim Curiosity and co-founder of the award-winning Seattle newsletter, The Evergrey. She was a 2019 fellow at the Henry M. Jackson Foundation and a 2016 fellow at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University. She was named one of the 50 most influential women in Seattle and served twice as a juror for the Pulitzer Prizes, a prize that I would very much like to put my name in the running for. A Mexican immigrant, Latina, and dual U.S.-Mexico citizen, she lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids and is the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents. And with that, let me welcome on my amazing friend and dear co-conspirator in this work and leader, Mónica Guzmán.
Here we are. There we are.
There you
Hi,
are.
Manu. How's it going? Hi, everyone.
Hey, Monica, that's quite the biography. I'm super grateful to see you and be here with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, really, really excited for this conversation. It's been quite the roller coaster and really encouraging to see more and more people lean into exactly this topic.
So with that, what I want to quickly do is just outline the structure of the program, and then we're going to get right into some questions. And most importantly, to the audience, this conversation is for you and it's for us. It's really to understand this topic. And so the way that we're going to split this up is we're going to talk for about 55 minutes. The first 30 minutes, I'm going to really focus on Monica's book. And the second sort of 30 minutes of that, I'm going to focus much more on some of those hard personal questions, like why is this work so difficult? Why is it hard to scale up, and get to some of those? And then at the end, for the last 25 minutes, the audience is welcome to submit any questions. So please, as you're listening to this, if there's anything that I say, that Monica says, anything that perks your curiosity, which also happens to be a major focal point of Monica's book, please feel free to drop your questions. So with that, 30 minutes of conversation on the book, 30 minutes about each other, and then 25 minutes of questions. I want to get right into it, Monica. Why write this book at this moment in our politics and our democracy?
Well, I think a lot of people relate to the problem. The polarization that's around us, it's political polarization, but it's personal. It's in our workplace, it's in our communities, it's in our families. It's the reason that many people are breaking relationships. They don't know what else to do. It's the reason to feel pretty desperate for a lot of people about the state of things in our country. It's affecting so much, these ways that we think about how we communicate and what we're missing. For me, there were two threads that brought me to the book. The first is professional. I've been a journalist my whole career, and I'm a journalist because I take very seriously this idea that I want to help people understand each other. So I thought, okay, I'll write stories in the craft known as journalism. I'll do it as responsibly as I possibly can. And hopefully I'll put out some information that helps communities understand themselves and make better decisions. Cool. But sometime in the last 5 to 10 years, that model kind of broke for me, because I realized, wait a minute, just telling stories into this media landscape, into this fractured society, the pieces that they're all shattered on the ground and they don't talk to each other. So how is this helping us understand each other? It's not enough. So I knew I had to duck out of that somehow and work on the underlying problem. And the second quick thread that I'll mention is the personal one, which is that this whole time I've also been, as I say in my bio, and it's always interesting to see the reaction when I'm in person. Some people kind of give sort of nervous chuckles at the line, the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents. But it's very intentionally said, and I mean every word. We have had just incredible fights and arguments over the years because they are Republican conservative, I'm liberal Democrat. They voted for Trump twice. I voted for the Democrat candidates, and my goodness. But somehow, despite all the heat, we have been able to have the kinds of conversations that help us understand each other. And the contrast, right, with what's going on, how it feels hopeless and helpless, makes me want to say, hang on, I think there are ways through this, and they're easier than we think. So let me take some time and put this down.
And I promise I want to get deeper into the book, but I have to ask you first, so that the audience can familiarize themselves with that personal part of the story that you identified. Where did you grow up? Where did your parents raise you? What's a little bit of your personal background? Because I think that sometimes helps the audience relate.
Yeah, so I was born in Monterrey, Mexico, and I'm a dual, U.S.-Mexico citizen now. But when I was in kindergarten, we moved to the States, and soon after that, went to New Hampshire. So I grew up mostly in New Hampshire. In the year 2000, that's when my parents finally got their citizenship for the United States, which they were super excited about. There's this photograph I love of my mom's naturalization ceremony, and she's holding a little flag, a little American flag, and she's got red, white, and blue, and she's just beaming. And I'm 17, and I'm, just hanging onto her shoulder. And so we picked this country. This was a selection kind of thing. And we also had the really interesting experience of voting kind of at the same time, right? Because I was just going to turn 18 and they were just starting to vote because they just became citizens. And so we sort of became political creatures all at once, across these two generations. And that was quite the experience.
And I bet going from, Monterrey, Mexico to New Hampshire must have been quite the adaptation. And that's putting it lightly. And it probably required a curious temperament. So with that, I want to get into the book a little bit. And but is there by any chance you have a copy of the book, Monica? I'm traveling, and so I don't have the direct copy.
Yeah, hang on.
Yeah,
I may need to do this for a quick second.
That's fine. And everyone, you keep going. And for everyone that knows this is the behind the scenes of what it's like to do a book placement. So Monica, let's see that book really quickly. I want to make sure everyone sees it.
Here it is.
So I never thought of it that way. That statement in and of itself requires a degree of curiosity. Yep. Why do you think curiosity, that specific skill, out of all the different skills that we can be advocating for and putting in the forefront of our minds, why curiosity?
Yeah, several reasons. And mostly it is so swift and effective and natural and universal. It is a cognitive unlocking of something. It's how we reach for the key and open a door. People call it the knowledge emotion, which I love because it is a kind of emotion. It's often accompanied by anxiety if you have what's called deprivation-based curiosity, where it's like, I gotta know when is the vaccine going to be available? When are they going to lift the mask mandates? It's an itch you can't scratch, and so you check your favorite news source over and over again for new information. Or you might have interest-based curiosity, which is more adventurous, and that one's like somebody told you some random fact, and 2 hours later you're still on the internet discovering more about it. So a very perceptive question, I think, is the most powerful way to cross any divide in an instant. Right? A perceptive question in the right context, in a conversation where you are connected and there's trust and goodwill, you can learn so much that you outside of the context of the conversation would have been unimaginable. So it's about that. Curiosity is activated when we pay attention to the gap between what we know and what we don't know. And depending on how motivated we are, we could do a lot to fill in that gap for ourselves. And this is how we learn. And as long as we hold that door open, as long as we don't tell ourselves that we are already certain, that we don't need to know anymore, those questions could keep coming and keep our minds open and keep us humble.
And you mentioned perceptive questions, and it's something that you touch upon in your book. What is a perceptive question, and how do we come up with those perceptive questions in sort of different social circumstances so that we can, bridge that gap and get somewhere deeper?
Yeah. So perceptive question means you are perceiving the other person. You are listening deeply. You are paying attention to them on various levels. So it's what they say, but it's also how they're saying it. It's also, do they seem comfortable? Is the volume turning up? Is that giving you some sense that what they're talking about has a lot of deep meaning to them? Are they repeating themselves over and over again? Are they bringing something up almost as a cue, a hint to drop, a little crumb that they want you to ask about, right? There's all these ways that we communicate with each other that are pretty extraordinary. And so, yeah, a perceptive question is one that is also looking to be curious about the person who's holding the idea, not just the idea. A lot of us think about disagreement and sort of the boundaries of that are the boundaries of the topic we're talking about. But this really blows wide open. The discovery of it blows wide open when we're curious about each other with each other. And the boundaries of the conversation extend far beyond, let's talk about immigration, let's talk about abortion. No, let's talk about you. Let's talk about me. Let's talk about the meaning we bring to these issues. That's what's going to make it human and powerful and able to get past a lot of the barriers that we put up.
And you mentioned this a little bit before about the personal, that being one of those threads. And it's evident as you read your book that your relationship with your parents was pretty essential in how you think about some of this. If you were to ground this in some tangible notions that a lot of us could also relate to in our families, like what were some of those challenges that you experienced, for example, with your parents? How did you overcome some of those challenges? And what lessons can you take from you overcoming those challenges to apply to, let's say, upcoming Thanksgiving dinners? How would you describe that process?
Well, everybody's relationship is very different. So that is worth saying, because a lot of these strategies, they don't map on neatly to so many different contexts. And that's really important. Everybody's relationship truly, truly is different. It's so much about how much trust is there. Among the challenges, I remember one in particular that really hurt was sitting down with my mom ahead of the 2020 election, and me getting kind of excited because I can tell, like, oh, we're about to go at it on something political. I forget what the topic was, but like, here we go, right? And I'm getting ready. I'm getting like my rhetorical skills. Here we go. And then I see my mom, and she's sitting on the other side of the table, and she goes, and we haven't even started talking yet. And so I'm like, Mom, what's going on? And she goes, why bother, Monica? Like, you're the journalist, you're the communicator, you're good at this. I don't know that I feel up to it today. And that made me so sad, because I realized just because I might be a more experienced communicator doesn't make me any more eligible or my view any more important or valid than my mother's, right? I mean, we both have English as a second language, but I grew up sort of more educated in English than she did and whatnot. So that just hurt me, because I thought, man, that is a barrier, isn't it? So I've thought about that, how we can make sure that we are not engaging in asymmetrical warfare. I think people do this too when they come in with like all their articles, like memorized statistics. Here we go. And it's like machine gun fire at the other side.
I've got all my statistics ready. I'm ready to go.
And if the other person didn't show up thinking we had to do homework, what you're having is a conversation that maybe they didn't consent to. And so there's this sort of unevenness in that. And then whoever feels like they're winning, it's not real. It's not genuine. You're not actually going for the meaning that both people bring. You're sort of playing like a who gets an A in this topic. And that's not inclusive. That doesn't welcome all perspectives. It doesn't welcome all people with all kinds of skills. Whether they're good communicators or not, who cares? They're bringing meaning. So let's make sure that it can all be welcome. That's just one example.
Really quickly, because we live in such a politically charged time, could you define the word inclusive and what that means to you?
Ooh, thank you.
We go off script.
This is great. I've never been asked this, and I'm so thrilled. Okay, I get to make this up as I go along. For me, inclusive means every human being is able to express what's in their heart, is able to put their meaning into a pool of shared meaning. And so that's about different races, and that's about different genders, and that's about different sexualities, and it's about different viewpoints too. If we took our opinions and put them on and off like a hat, then maybe that wouldn't be part of inclusion to me. But that's not how opinions work, even though we often treat them that way on social media. Like, I can talk somebody out of their opinion with a meme. Watch. Like, nope, that's not a thing, people. Opinions they have these deep roots that we don't see, especially online, where we're not even, it's a non-place that makes us into non-people. But they have these deep roots. We often arrive at our opinions, our thoughts and our convictions sort of are there. And we go, oh man, this is how I feel. This is what I believe. And we might, go and invite like a mix of other things to sharpen us and add some friction. But it's like the example I use is with my husband. I'm a diehard Trekkie, and he's a diehard Star Wars fan. And there is nothing I can do.
I am neither.
How dare you? You have to pick a geek side.
But Monica, the reason why I asked Harry Potter, the reason why I asked you that question was because one of the things that you describe in your book is, that we all have this thing called an assumption assistant. And, in our charged political environment today, when you hear words like inclusivity or equity or free speech or religion, we immediately start to craft these assumptions. And I wanted you to answer that question. What is inclusivity to you? Because that is one of those, words that triggers assumptions in our
absolutely.
Could you dig a little bit deeper into what that assumption assistant is, and what you mean by that?
Yeah. So assumption assistant is basically really the bundle of judgments and projections that come up when we meet somebody or we're in a new environment or what have you. You know, somebody walks up to us and based on how they look, what they're wearing, their age, where we are, all kinds of things, we'll make assumptions before we've talked to them or know anything about them. And, you know, based on the game of probability, maybe we're right. Maybe we're right more often than not. But regardless, these assumptions are always going to come. We can't stop them from coming. But what we can do is try to be aware of them. And the reason that we should be aware of them is because we can then, once we're aware of them, turn those assumptions into questions. You know, so I don't know, I could give examples, right, that would like surface stereotypes. So let's be candid, right? You know, somebody with a lot of piercings and tattoos who's on the younger end approaches, you know, an older woman who looks very put together with a big sort of Christian cross, right? And the person with tattoos is like, oh my gosh, this woman is a conservative, she's evangelical or something, and she probably hates me for this and that reason. And then the woman would look at the piercings and go, oh man, this person probably rioted and burned down businesses, you know, in his city and blah, blah, blah. And so, so we come together with that being whispered in our ear. And so the challenge becomes, hang on, you know, like we would do with anything. So you can't believe that. You have to be aware of it. So it's all suspended and you turn it into a question like, oh, I notice the cross on her chest. I wonder what her relationship with religion is. You know, I notice the tattoos. Cool. There could be a number of stories there, you know, jumping to like, oh, this is the image I see on the news as a conservative of people destroying downtown or what have you. So it's there's so many layers deep. And in polarized times, they've become so condensed and so associated, right? That peeling each layer off takes a little work, but the more that we notice them, again, that the more we give ourselves that chance to turn our judgments into questions, turn our assumptions into questions, and let curiosity do its work.
So this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's in our environment that is so driven by social media and by traditional media, in which we oftentimes never meet, you know, that put together woman with a cross, or that very, piercing ridden man. And instead our assumptions are entirely crafted by the media that we're consuming. How do you think that we can be hyper aware of these assumptions in an environment where oftentimes we never actually directly interact with the people that we disagree with?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what a great question. One thing is to recognize that we are spending a lot of time swimming in those media narratives without checking them with reality. And we know that's happened. There's a lot of evidence of a lot of sorting going on where people are moving to be closer to folks who seem more like them, which means that as in general, our society is getting more distant from different kinds of lifestyles that could lead to different viewpoints. So I think that's really important. Another thing that's coming to mind is, you know, Thanksgiving is coming up, and more in American life, these types of things, holidays that bring families together across, you know, generations and whatnot, and from different cities, are becoming some of our only opportunities to encounter difference. And the opportunity that we do have is that, well, there's a relationship there. And when you have a relationship at the base of difference, you have a lot more hope of being able to build that bridge, of being able to understand that other person. But you also have a lot more to lose, so you have to be careful there. A lot of it too is acknowledging, you know, social media has enormous power to connect us, and it has enormous power to divide us, and it does hack into our psychology, and it does flatten us into these opinions that just go into showdowns. So how do we, it's almost like changing the ratio. Can we change the ratio? How often are we having these tough discussions on platforms that flatten us and restrict our full toolbox of human communication versus the rest of the time? So have more in-person conversations about these issues. Even with people you think agree with you, you might be surprised. There's plenty of nuance to go around.
And I want to take this conversation a little bit into the politics, because we have these things called the midterm elections coming up in 2 weeks. Don't worry. That is the external expression of my internal soul. But before I go there, I want to go back to an earlier point that you made about consent in these types of conversations. You know, one of the things you write about a lot in your book is the role that values play in conversations. How do you think we can utilize the values, the deeper part, not just, my stance on abortion, but why I believe that stance on abortion. How do we use values in these very divisive conversations and divisive times to get somewhere productive?
Yeah, I think values are the key to common ground. And common ground is this phrase that people roll their eyes at now because it's thrown around as if it's just find common ground. We'll get through this if we just find common ground. It's like, yeah, easier said than done, yo. Like that stuff's tough. How do you find common ground across, Roe Wade stuff? It's really, really hard. But I think the answer is values. So the way you get to that in conversation is by asking about concerns. And this is something I first experienced as a journalist, that when you ask people what concerns them about something, and there's various versions of this question I'll get to, you are not asking a very judgmental question at all. You're actually asking a question that curiosity can do a lot with, because you're gathering information. What concerns you? What else concerns you? Anything else? Anything else? And as a journalist, I'm putting it all down there, and I'm getting all that. And this person is getting the opportunity to, put on the table and set down these things that kind of animate them. So behind those concerns are values. Maybe the value of security, maybe the value of caring for those close to us.
And sorry to interrupt,
other things.
Could you differentiate between values and concerns?
Yes. A concern might be, guns and school shootings, right? A concern might be, well, I'm concerned that if we arm teachers or staff at schools, that it's just going to get more dangerous in there, that we're just going to end up causing more harm. So, behind those concerns about, well, there's the value of safety, of wanting to keep people safe, but also of making sure that people have the freedom to protect themselves, the freedom to thrive, right? And self-direction. So that all shows up. And someone would come in and say, well, it's the guns that are dangerous and whatnot. And so maybe that person is leaning a little bit away from the power, giving the power to an individual to defend and protect themselves, because they really are leaning towards safety and they believe that's the way. But others might say, no, that power to protect ourselves is really, really important. So let's instead make sure that guns go to trustworthy individuals, but let's not go too far because I don't want my freedoms, impinged. So it's freedom, it's security, it's caring for others, it's all kinds of things, freedom to move. And so those values are the ones that we do hold in common, because nobody hates freedom. Anytime you see somebody say that as a slogan, just don't believe it. It's obviously wrong. Yeah. Nobody hates being safe. Nobody doesn't believe in these core values. What's different is we stack them in a different order for different issues.
Right. It's almost like, a value might be free speech, but a concern might be speakers being invited on campus.
Exactly.
And the reason I wanted to touch on that is because oftentimes it seems like in conversations, we conflate values and concerns, and then we stay at that concern level and then never get to the actual values.
Yes. And then we use that to say that they don't share my values. Like, no, maybe they just don't have your concern as high as you do, but they have another one that's even higher and a different set of values that's kind of coming up on top for them.
So you'll be happy to know this, but today we were at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, and at the end of the event, we basically went around in this group, and the question that we had everyone answer was, what concerns you most and what do you most care about? And fascinating enough, to your point, there's a lot of similarity when you just look at people's values and when you look at people's concerns. And my question there would be that, in this hyper-polarized environment where people say that there's a lot at stake in these conversations, how do you, disentangle the question of privilege in these conversations? Oftentimes people say that, well, if I'm privileged, I can easily engage in these conversations because nothing's really at stake for me. But, this, for example, underrepresented minority child has a much harder time engaging in these conversations. How do you grapple with that?
Yeah, I was going to say what privilege means to you, because that's another word that can mean a lot and that can feel politically loaded. So when you say privilege,
I'm asking the questions. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, but when you say privilege,
it's I think with respect to at least my generation, and when it comes to how we approach our chapters, oftentimes people say privilege in the sense of you're at a certain point in your social location that you are necessarily shielded from some problem. So people will often throw around the term white privilege, this notion that if you're of a certain skin color, you're less likely to experience certain points of discrimination. And I'm just sort of steel manning the argument, but that's sort of what I mean by privilege, is your social location in society and what that implies for what you can access and what you can experience.
Yeah. So I am really grateful that that concept has come up and been so key to the way that we think, in new, fresh ways about how to have conversations, how to make sure that the discomfort is not too harmful and things like that. I think that's awesome. But I think we have to be really careful not to draw those sorts of conclusions about privilege in a way that makes these sort of rigid rules about whose meaning is most important. I think that's what gets a little bit dangerous. And this is a tough thing to untangle. So please, guide me if I go somewhere kind of off. But I believe, kind of like I was saying, that curiosity has this enormous power, like a perceptive question can just cut through the walls of things. Within a conversation, we can cut through a lot.
Yeah.
Within a conversation, when you get to a lot of depth, you can connect at a certain level where, if you still believe yourself to be limited by the conditions of your society, you are limiting yourself in that conversation. In that conversation, other things can actually kind of take a back seat as you explore who you are as people. And I've seen it happen. Maybe you've seen it happen, where if we come in telling ourselves that we are permanently disadvantaged in this exchange, or permanently advantaged in this exchange, then we may be limiting some sense of discovery of that social condition. The other thing, of course, is that I've seen a lot of certainty about privilege that I think is questionable, right? So, the student of color at an elite university, who might be talking about race, and in the same room, there's someone who's working for relatively pennies, in a rural part of this country, who's white, and who knows, right? There's race, there's class, there's gender, there's power, there's upbringing, there's nationality. We can get lost in this. And I think that's it. It's like, let's not get lost in it.
Yeah.
And so, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because this is something I'm still working on. There's no final answers here.
Yeah.
All I know is that some really powerful things happen when we don't feel too limited by it. But another thing I'll say is that it is true that power is real, right? And for those people who are shielded from certain problems, my hope is that they can compensate for that by being even more curious about the experiences they don't have, because the consequences are that much higher for other groups of people. But I think that's the lever to pull, right? It's like, get more curious, not feel insignificant or that you don't matter in this conversation. I don't think that's it.
And I think the notion of limiting the possibility of something that happens in a conversation, I think very insightful and very well put. And I think when it comes to these dialogues, before we shift more to some of the challenges around this work in that second half of the conversation, where we talk more about how we take this to the next step, the final question I have for you in this part is, what do you think have been like the biggest critiques of your book or of the work? What have you found, if you were to sort of be introspectively curious about the literature that you've written, what have you found has been some of the most difficult stuff to contend with and dealing with those arguments?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. The barriers is what I think of it. So one of them is reciprocity, the challenge of reciprocity. People say, I'm curious, but they're not curious with me. What am I supposed to do? Right? So I can say more about that. Another one is the idea, you want me to talk to people who deny my existence. Yeah. Right? There's that red line for people, and different people put that red line in different places. But because this person is pro-life, they deny my existence as a woman, they deny my rights as a person. And so, man, once you put that on that place, then, oh my gosh, I think that's a big barrier for people. Yeah, and there's also this critique of following this kind of path with curiosity means that there's no action, right? Which is a huge misconception. that if I'm just asking questions and understanding all day, whoop-de-doo,
Mhm.
what are we solving? Oh, great, I understand my whoever, the other side parents, but they're still voting that way that I think is terrible. Or, how is that going to fix these political problems that I see as sort of life and death? So it goes back to the high stakes. These things are so high stakes that being curious will only harm the energy and ability to act.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, I think all three of these are misguided. and
Well-
I have my responses.
Well, I actually
but they
that's a perfect transition. I mean, it shows how perceptive you are, because those were actually going to be similar versions of that I was going to ask about the challenges to this. So like, let's actually
Mhm.
unpack the reciprocity point.
Mhm.
And this is something I was going to ask earlier when you said, we enter into a conversation. Oftentimes I'll hear from my friends, like, I'm talking to this person, but I'm curious. They're not as curious as me. Why is that? And maybe there's some pride involved. Maybe they are actually curious, but just not showing up the way that you want them to be curious. How do you parse that sort of critique of reciprocity, and especially when we feel it in our daily conversations?
Right. I mean, it's beginning by relating to how darn frustrating that can be. It's extremely frustrating. A lot of times when there are these disagreements, we may come, ready to be curious, ready to make it about them in hopes that it'll have good results. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that want to be heard. We all want to be heard. And so when we're approaching someone across this divide who we feel is not hearing us, we only have so much fuel to hear them before we see some progress in the other direction. So that's interesting, right? Like, that is totally, totally relatable. And what I really take issue with is this idea that other person is not curious. They're either not capable of it, they're not interested in it. And one thing that I will say is this, because I think this comes up a lot. The principle at the core of this dynamic is that people can hear when they're heard. And I cannot control, I have no idea what it will take for you to feel heard by me. It could be a lot. And here's what makes it even harder. Let's say, that it's my conservative uncle, and he's surrounded by liberal media and surrounded by liberal family members. And here's this liberal niece or whatever coming up and asking him questions. What's he going to feel? Is he going to be all excited to ask her questions? No, he's surrounded by this stuff. He's going to be so excited that someone's actually listening to him, that for him, it's going to be a sense of, oh my gosh, I finally have a chance. Finally have a shot. This works both ways, right? I've seen it happen both ways. So that's part of the issue. People, unfortunately, a lot of us sort of treat each other as representatives of the side rather than individuals. So that's a problem. That's not a great reaction from the uncle, but it is a very natural and normal reaction. So in other words, it will take more time. And I think there's courage in patience. And I think the most important thing to do with a bridge is not to cross it, but to keep it, to not throw in the towel just because you're not getting reciprocity. Curiosity is contagious, but people have to feel heard, and people have to understand that you're an individual and they're an individual, and that there's enough goodwill. And that means you have to demonstrate it, sometimes over and over again, to overcome the stereotypes they're aiming at you about your side.
That's very well said, especially this notion that it takes courage. But if you extend that courage to let them be heard, you're going to maintain that bridge at worst, and at best, you're going to be able to cross it and get somewhere. The second part that you had identified was this notion of existence. That let's say you and I are talking about the status of Indian American immigrants in the United States, and let's say that I raised this notion that actually, like, this conversation, the policy that you're advocating for, Monica, is just threatening the way that my family has shown up, and I just cannot engage in this conversation.
Right.
What would you say to someone that responded in that way? And how do we interrogate that notion of existence as a reason for why we can't have that conversation?
Yeah, and it's so tough, isn't it? It's so tough.
Yeah.
I mean, first, again, relating to it. Politics is really personal. I mean, in my lifetime, it has never felt more personal. These are not, for so many people, these are not just disagreements. It's not some intellectual exercise. It's somebody saying that I cannot be who I am. And that's how it feels, and that's how it is, right? And there's no convincing otherwise. And so once you get to that point, it really does feel like any engagement is a servility. It's a lack of self-respect. I'm not going to do that. I have dignity, right? So here again, I think there's the possibility to complicate that with some reframes. You and I both know John Rauch, who's an incredible author and thinker, and he tells a story about being part of the same-sex, the fight for same-sex marriage. And the last thing that allies of that movement wanted to do was go and talk to folks who had the kinds of ideas that basically resulted in thinking something is very wrong with people who are gay, right? But they went and talked to them anyway. A lot of courage there. And what they heard, among the things they heard, was, oh, a lot of these folks have children or loved ones who are gay.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they realized was that the question that began to change minds was, don't you want this person you love to be happily married? Wouldn't you want that joy for them? And so there, it was like leaning into that tension, which exists for so many people between who they love and what they believe, until the love kind of wins, you know? And so they couldn't have learned that was a persuasive technique for that particular cause without listening extraordinarily empathetically. And so that's the other thing. Like, if you think that you're too activist for this, let me turn that around for you. You're too activist not to do this.
Yeah.
You have to do this. You have to enrich your understanding. The world is giving you a lot of ghosts and monsters that aren't there. You need to understand what's really going on and how these are real people and how they're truly motivated, so that if you have the better idea and the better persuasive case, you can make it. Now, it may not be you, and I'm not saying that you. No. Everyone has their own individual calculation of whether they can get into this. But goodness, I hope for all of our sakes that there are enough of us who are able to do this, because stepping away doesn't create the change we think it will.
I feel like we're like two sides of the same coin. I mean, you articulated, courageous curiosity is this notion that using the same-sex marriage example, that it is actually a mechanism for change. And one of the things that we've seen talk to young people about is that, these conversations aren't just, this sort of feel-good exercise, but they're also the backbone of every social movement that was successful in the 20th century.
Right. Imagine if everyone was like, not me, not me,
exactly.
not me, not me. Like, well,
no change is happening. No change
then
is
nothing
happening.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we don't want change. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
So sort of like the third part of that question that you'd raised was, or the third part of that critique is the high stakes nature of these conversations. So let's say that you and I are at a dinner table, we're having a conversation, feels relatively low stakes. There don't seem to be as many complications around that. But let's say that now you're getting two elected officials to have this type of conversation. How do you recommend that we have these authentic conversations, especially when people are in positions of power, where it appears that engaging in a conversation is actually potentially ceding power, that it's actually not, that it's a better strategy to just destroy, like I don't need to be part of the conversation. Like how do you encourage people in power and elected folks to have these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is to point out that we conflate certainty with strength, which is really unfortunate, because I think it's actually the other way around. And the Greater Good Center at Berkeley has been putting together this extraordinary research on intellectual humility, and I've been kind of going through it like I'm back at school, because
Jason Marsh's work. Yeah.
Yes, it's awesome. And yeah, there's these studies that are demonstrating that when leaders approach someone they disagree with or a contentious idea with that level of like putting out a welcome mat, here's how I see it, but I might be missing something. What do you think? I'm pretty sure about this, but what, tell me what you've got. And so one might think that, they compared that sort of more hedging, uncertain type of language. They compared that with a script where the person was just like, it is like this. It is like this. What do you have to say for yourself? And it turns out that rather than the audience or the study subjects thinking that the person who was a little bit softer on that delivery is sort of less strong of a leader, it was actually the opposite. Like, no, that person gets more, their point of view is still seen as equally right. Like, oh, no, they're right. In both scenarios, I see their argument the same way. It's really compelling. But in the scenario where they're a little bit more like, considerate of the other person on the other side, they're actually better respected as a leader. So whatever assumptions we have that the opposite is true are just false. That's not how it goes. So it's not about, we think that we are being servile, right? When we allow any opening to our point of view, or that we're dropping our convictions, we're abandoning our side and the causes that we believe in. But again, I think it's just the opposite. We represent our side well when we bring it into productive conversation with other perspectives that might oppose it. That's how we represent it well. That's how we bring it into democracy. And if it is indeed the best perspective, that is how it wins.
And there's a piece of that I want to elevate, that you said that we think that there's certainty and strength, or that there's strength and certainty. And I think that is exactly a good way to sort of think about the fact that being a stuck partisan does not necessarily mean that you're a morally superior human. There's this interesting quote in your book that we noted down that I want to read to you, and I'm just curious how you relate to this. You say that people are harder to move from our positions on things that matter to us for good reason, because our whole lives have led us here. And this goes to this notion, again, that these conversations oftentimes are very high stakes.
Right.
How do we, and maybe we don't, but what is your recommendation on how we can try to, unwrap our personal from a policy or a conversation? And is that the right, should we be doing that?
Well, that's the thing, right? Because it's funny. You want to unwrap in some way the personal from the policy so that you can engage in the conversation, because you're going to be so scared. You're going to feel under threat, right? But once you're in the conversation, the opportunity is, the thing you believe in strongly, your whole life backs it up. If you want to, really the best scenario is to be seen, is for that path to be seen, is for you to have the opportunity to say, let me walk you through my life, sir. Let me share with you some moments, right? Where I've confronted struggle, where it's been painful. Because when we share those stories with each other, and there's been research to back this up too, stories about our struggles around our own morality or what we believe are far more compelling and persuasive and resonate better than just abstractly declaring our position on something. So that's the opportunity. You don't want to lose the personal from the policy at all once you're in the conversation. Once you're in the conversation, you want to bring that personal experience in, because that's what's going to help everybody else see themselves in you and go, oh, I never thought of it that way. Interesting, right? But that takes getting to that point. And that's where sometimes, we see things so personally that we, again, feel that we are going to harm ourselves by even engaging, even associating, letting the monster out of the box or whatever it is. But again, I would reframe it that I think the greater harm is caused by too few of us letting ourselves be seen and expecting the world to change.
Jarring transition, but Twitter's not a very curious place. And
that's great. Best segue of the night.
At least I was honest.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's just where my mind went to. Because we're talking about these conversations and the importance of having them, and yet it seems like the only time a lot of people are actually engaging are through these online platforms. What is your recommendation to have these courageous conversations when tweets are limited to 280 characters and we're all anonymous, and you could offend me thousands of miles away and never have to deal with the complications and unintended consequences of having offended me? How do you think that we adapt your model for these in-person conversations to a world that is so online?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is the hardest thing, which is just follow the principle that just because it starts there doesn't mean it ends there, doesn't mean it continues there. It starts on Twitter, take it offline, take it somewhere where you have a lot better chance of communicating meaning successfully to each other when you're not limited by the constraints of that platform and the space. That's super important. But if you insist on staying on these platforms, it is possible, but it is a lot harder. And the way in which it's harder is all those things that get communicated silently or through tone or other things somehow have to get interpreted and articulated into words so that they fit. And that's why my friend Angel Eduardo says that social media is the boss level of discourse, because somehow you have to slow it all down. You have to take a breath when everyone else is reacting. you've got to take a breath and you've got to reflect and you've got to, be curious about what someone says. So you have to slow down when everything that these platforms want is for you to react quickly. Your pulse is quickening because somebody just attacked you. Oh my God, who's seeing this? Right? And all you can think of is fight or flight, fight or flight. So the strength that it takes and the courage to be like, no, hang on. We're going to slow this down. What are they assuming about me? Maybe there's something they're not seeing. Let me ask. Is this what they mean or is this what they mean? Before I just attack them, assuming I know what they mean, right? So yeah, it's you deciding to slow it down, even though everybody else is getting high off this reactivity. So it's really tough. You have to have a lot of fortitude to do it, but it is possible. And in fact, it can be really cool because then you take advantage of the fact that you do have people from all over the country coming together in one conversation.
And as you said, it is hard and it requires fortitude and it requires courage. And I want to, put the hat on of a person that is relatively apathetic about our politics. Let's say doesn't really care as much. And they're like, Monica, like this stuff just seems really difficult. Like, I'm just going to go bury my head and like watch YouTube videos and not really care about any of this. Like, why should I engage in a courageous conversation? What's your advice or argument against this notion that honestly, disengagement sounds like a much easier option than a courageous conversation?
Yeah, I mean, first to be kind of honest, there's always folks who kind of sit stuff out, and that's okay. I think that a healthy society is not one where everybody does all the same things, right? We need our fighters, we need our partisans who don't want to ask any questions. We just got to make sure that they're balanced out by people who are at the edges of their communities of belief with a hand out, right? Like looking to bring people in and looking to make that border porous. Right now, it's not porous. I think the partisan, like certain voices are too strong and they're not being balanced out. So same thing is like, we're never going to have an electorate that is all leaned in all the way. That said, I do think that one of the main issues right now is that we are so divided, we're blinded. And so whether you care deeply about politics or you don't, I think every single person is in a world of funhouse mirror skews of all kinds of things where we think we see the debates. We don't see the real debates. We're seeing some proxy awful thing that's been completely exaggerated, right? We guess at the views on the other side, but we constantly exaggerate them. And it's not great. I suppose a weirdly encouraging thing is that folks who are less sort of partisan or less sort of mobilized by this stuff actually tend to have fewer exaggerations about the other side. So there's that. But either way, they're still living in a world that is being colored and drawn and largely moved by folks who are deep in these exaggerations. So I think if we want to see the world for what it is and not what people's imaginations have constructed it to be, and if we want to see the debates for what they are, which gives us a chance in hell at solving them, then I think we all need to get one step more curious. It's not everyone wake up like a Zen master tomorrow and go talk to a Nazi. No, it's get one step more curious, whatever that means to you. Even if you're not ready to have an actual conversation, fine. Next time you read a headline that's an opinion that's on the other side of yours, but is popularly held, read that opinion asking yourself, what is the deep down honest concern that's being expressed here? And you'll already empathize a little bit more and you'll be a bit more curious. So baby steps, y'all. Baby steps.
You bring such an insightful perspective to this conversation. And I just want to remind everyone that, we're going to have 25 minutes in about 9 minutes to ask Monica any questions. And so please feel free to drop questions into the chat box. Our team is going through it because really your perspective on this is fascinating. And one of the things, Monica, that I think you do really well is you say things really nicely. So one of the quotes that I took is that we're so divided that we're blinded. And one thing that I want to ask you is, as the midterms are coming up, what are some things that people can do practically as individual agents in society to try and take off some of those blinders, to try to be a little bit open-minded as they go to the ballot box, to perhaps challenge themselves a little bit and to potentially not think in these blocked mega party identities?
Yeah. I mean, one thing is when you see the surface level of discourse, which is memes, political ads, obviously this is not new. I mean, don't believe all of that. Don't take it at face value, but more importantly, let your curiosity do its work. You see a political ad and it's an attack ad, one candidate against the other. Notice what you don't know. Notice where you want to lean in and know more. Is that real? Oh, is that true? How bad is that? Right. And I've done that where I see a political ad and I go, I don't know anything about that. And then I'll go online and I'll look for, I think local newspapers have some of the best coverage, and they'll go deep and they'll really, more than most media, they'll really try to understand, okay, where this side's coming from, that side, they'll talk to voters, they'll bring those perspectives together. And that will give you a lot more better kind of informed things, right, than just taking the meme at its word, because those are doing their jobs. They're trying to get the message out and mobilize people, but they're not really about understanding. So that's more on each of us to do that. The other thing is, and this might be surprising, but when I say that we're so divided, we're blinded, I also mean within our sides. Right. One of the ways that this polarization has blinded us is, even if you're all blue and everyone you hang around with is blue, or you're all red and everyone you hang around with is red, you're walking around assuming more often that everyone agrees with you in all the ways. There's a lot of shades of blue. There's a lot of shades of blue everywhere. And when we don't see the shades of blue, it's just as bad. It's just as harmful. So take the opportunity to sit down with your friends. You've not really talked about abortion. You're pretty sure you're all on the same side, generally speaking. But I don't know. There's a lot of asterisks on this. 15-week, 24-week. I don't know, what's right? Where does life begin anyway? What do you think? Make it a philosophical debate. And when there's enough trust, it might actually be an enjoyable conversation. You don't know, but you give it a chance, and you might come away understanding something more about your friends, right? That kind of enriches the way that you see them and that they see you.
Monica, I could keep hogging up this time and taking up the privileges of continue to ask you my questions, because it's so awesome to hear your perspective. I'm actually going to change plans a little bit and go to some of these questions, because I think there's a lot, and there's some really nice ones, and I want to make sure I respect the audience's time on this. Before though I go there, is there anything else that you would like to articulate or say about your book, or a certain message that you feel that hasn't been able to come out yet, that you want people to leave with?
I guess I'll say one thing that could have come up earlier, and that I think is pretty relevant, which is, well, actually, no, I won't. We'll see if it comes out in the questions. I think I'm good.
Well, now I'm curious, but let's go to some of these questions. And so one of them, and this is actually building off of the conversation that we just ended on about stakes, and about the fact that sometimes we just feel right about certain things. So this question is, that I want to be curious about and respectful to the other side, but for some issues, I realize I feel right, and nobody could convince me otherwise. I don't believe both sides have valid points on some issues. How do I work with that?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is that the goal of engaging across difference, if we're pretty sure that we're right on the position, that doesn't mean that the conversation is not going to be enriching and interesting, and the curiosity is not going to be a benefit. All the conversations I've had with my parents, they've never changed my mind on a single political issue, but they have humanized the other side in a way that brings down the volume for me. I sometimes feel like I'm walking around with a kind of immunity, where there's obviously, and it makes sense, so much stress, so much anxiety, sometimes existential, right? And I've felt that, and then I go to my parents, or I now know lots of folks who are more conservative than I am, and I'll bring up that issue and I'll go, and they'll be like, oh, but, and I'll go, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're still on opposite sides, but something they've said just makes me go, oh, so in other words, the motive that I ascribed to the people opposed to me as malevolent is not that malevolent. Oh, interesting. There's other considerations animating that side. Oh, and then I calm down. And when I calm down, more becomes possible. Creativity becomes possible. Collaboration becomes possible. And again, I see the other side as a lot better, more moral than I thought when I have these conversations. So that's, I think, something we miss. It's a lot easier to vilify the other side when we don't talk to them, and to assume that we understand their motives when we don't. And there might be good motives that still lead to a conclusion that we'll never subscribe to, but still motives we understand because they come from good values. And hearing that from a person, there's just nothing like that. So yeah, it's you don't think you'll change your mind? That's fine. That's fine. That's not the goal.
The process in and of itself is valuable. Unsurprisingly, we have a lot of questions, and so I'm going to try to we're going to try to make this as much of a lightning sort of round as possible.
Oh, okay. So that's hard for me. Shut
I
me
know.
up if needed, because I can go on.
No. Well, I'm sorry that you were so engaging that we have like 30 questions. So,
oh man, that's a lot.
this is to you as a proud liberal of conservative parents. This question is asking that a lot of liberal young adults are unforgiving of, and in fact, somewhat righteous about punishing their conservative parents. How can we encourage another perspective and a kinder attitude?
Well, I think the older generations, who are seeing this from their children, I think one of the main things to do is just set all that aside and sit down and ask them about what they think, and don't have any judgments. Don't really say anything in response. Just tell me more. Question of clarification. What do you mean by that? And then do that bit by bit over time and see what happens.
So this question is about how we help you go viral. So
okay.
the challenge is spreading the methods you suggest. What are the key lessons about how we might make these practices go viral? Do we talk to politicians, celebrities, TV shows? How do you become the second coming of whatever prophet one
Oh my
finds?
gosh. I mean, Manu, I know that you and I and so many bridge builders think about this. If I knew the answer, you're right, it feels like we'd already be viral, right? I believe so much is about modeling. So the more that we can model, even in small ways, these practices on social media, in public forums, talk about how important these things are, that filters up. I'm a big believer in sort of grassroots kind of spread. I'm maybe not the best person to ask about, but how does the big splash just spread all across so I don't know. I mean, Manu, maybe you have a better answer to that than I do, but I believe in modeling. I really do. I believe that we start to mirror things that work.
I believe we just do 5-minute TikTok dances that just elucidate, the curiosity.
yes, but no, seriously, I mean, for people who really believe this is important, talk about it, model it. There's no wrong answer here. People think it's hopeless, and that's why they're not even sure to give it a like. They think it's hopeless, and it's not.
So I want to actually ask you this question, which is that you said, the people that believe in this stuff have to be more vocal and talk about it and get out there. Interestingly, what we've seen on our campuses and working with young people across the country is that oftentimes the people that embody this sort of bridging temperament also happen to be the quiet ones. Oftentimes those that are naturally interested in listening and being curious are sometimes more introverted, or are sometimes not interested in getting out there and making a TikTok about what Monica said, because they're just naturally curious and they don't really want to express their opinions. How do you reconcile we deal with that challenge? Because it will require a lot of us to step up. But at the same time, our temperaments don't make it naturally easy for us to step up.
Yeah, no, I think we have like the full rainbow of different personalities of people finding their way in this work, and for different reasons. And I think that's actually really, really encouraging, because when you ask, so I work at Braver Angels, as we said, and once we had a retreat, and 25 people in national leadership all talked about how they came to believe that this was important enough to dedicate so much time to, and they had such vastly different personalities and stories and reasons that it just made me think, oh yeah, this is looking for a match to light the whole thing on fire, because it's not one or two things. It's 1,000 things that bring people to this. It's the quiet people, it's the loud people, it's the extroverts, it's the introverts. It's people who care about humans and about our society and about our future. And that's pretty great that it's that universal.
Yeah, fortunately, it's a lot of us. The next question I've got for you is asking a question about asking a question. So what kind of a question would you use with someone who A, only listens to the most extreme voices and conspiracy theorists, or B, is unwilling to listen or engage constructively? And I would actually just focus on partner. It seems like so much of our country, or so many folks in our country, seem to be ascribing to conspiracy theories. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, so this is where I think of a really meaningful distinction, really important distinction from a friend of mine, Buster Benson. He wrote a book called Why Are We Yelling? And he talks about the 3 conversations across disagreement: the conversation about what is true, the conversation about what is meaningful, and the conversation about what is useful. So here's the thing. we tend to get stuck on the conversation about what is true, thinking it's the only conversation we can have. So here's someone who believes something that, for all that we know, is a conspiracy theory. It's so deviant that there's just nothing saving it whatsoever. And so we think that once we come up against that wall, our only choice is to tell them they're wrong and hope that they agree. They won't, or stop talking. And that's sort of our two options. But there's another option, which is switch to the conversation about what is meaningful. The conversation about what is meaningful is not about the conspiracy. It's about them. It's about what took them to that conspiracy. So ask questions behind it. So tell me more about, what do you remember sort of animating, and I'm just making this up, right? But like, when do you remember hearing something about the Clintons that felt off to you, or about the COVID vaccine, or whatever it is? I'm just picking stuff out. But that only the conversation about what is meaningful builds trust. That's what I believe. That's the only one that builds trust. And without trust, we can't make headway on truth.
And to your point, oftentimes those folks that are mistrusting have certain things that have happened to them that predispose them that way. So what are some of those questions that we can ask? Exactly. I think
right. And I'll say one other thing is that even when there's no truth in people's conclusions, there's always truth in their story.
Right.
You will find places of connection. You will find common ground. You will relate. They will feel heard. They will become more intellectually humble. We can make progress.
So this question is not as related to your book, but it's an interesting question. Should people have to pass a basic civic test before they are allowed to vote?
Wow.
It's National Civics Day, as you and I found out.
No, definitely 100% not. That's my gut reaction. So let me explore that. I think if people have to pass a civic test in order to vote, that means that the country is no longer being held accountable to make sure that everyone could pass that civic test. That's a problem. If a lot of voters don't understand civics, that's something that we need to partner with each other and solve. But they must have the power to vote. Every person who believes a conspiracy theory, every person who holds a harmful idea must have the power to vote in our democracy. And that means, darn it, we have to actually make persuasion work. We have to make persuasion work so that the folks who hold the deviant ideas are very, very few and far between. And that bell curve is nice and fat. But that takes work, and it takes a lot of faith in our democracy and in this mess ultimately leading us somewhere good.
Got to fatten that bell curve. That's the mission statement. Agreed. The next question I've got for you is actually about defensiveness. So do you ever get strongly triggered and slip from curiosity to defensiveness? And how do you reconcile and deal with that?
Yeah, gosh. This is a tough question for me to answer. One, because I've spent so many years as a journalist having conversations of understanding without judgment that my judgment doesn't often, it's always kind of in the background, right? And that's fine. I think honestly, because the one thing I'm an activist about is this work. So where I get defensive is the people who come up and and just say this is nothing. And so I get defensive, but then I go, wait, the way that I get better at this work and that I add friction to it, and if it's going to be good, then I make sure that it is good, is to listen 100,000% to this person. So I have, that email comes in, I go, hey, can we talk? And then we talk because I want to understand. So yeah, but I do want to get defensive. I absolutely want to get defensive. Just the other day, someone left a review of the book saying, I think it's because Monica wrote this before the reversal of Roe v. Wade, but now that it's reversed, this book is terrible because it's asking us to be curious about people who would deny our humanity, things like that. And it's just, and but there's so much I want to say to that person, but that's not the way to begin. The way to begin is not to say anything to that person. It's to listen to that person and get in that person's shoes, because there's a lot of pain there and a lot of frustration. And when I sit in that space, I'm like, yeah, I get it.
I want to take those people to my village in India and give them some perspective. In Mexico,
it's like, you think our democracy's bad?
Yeah.
Why don't we head on down south of the border, yo? Let's be a little bit grateful and try to preserve this.
Well, so this question, the note is that this is from Ross. I don't know if this is my Ross or just another Ross in the
Oh
world.
yeah. Okay.
But they have finished a second reading of your book, a second
Oh,
one.
wow. It's flattering.
And the question that they're asking you is, and I don't exactly know if I understand this question, but what do you want your beliefs to do?
What do I want my beliefs to do?
I guess a better way
Okay.
to maybe think about it, because I was thinking about this question for a little
Yeah.
bit to ask it, is maybe like, what does success look like for you? Not as a person, but like in terms of these ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of these ideas, I think that, a political opinion, an opinion about politics is only useful if it's in conversation with other opinions about politics. So when I think about that, what do I want my beliefs to do? I want them to mix in with everybody else's honest beliefs and honest stories, because really what I want is for there to be high fidelity between the needs of the society and the actual ways that we try to fill those needs. So if some needs are not being heard, some concerns are being dismissed, some are being given way more attention than they deserve, then our values are not really showing up the way that they ought to. But we are a messy group of people. So success to me is that, like, the politics I prefer is one that really, really represents and brings into conversation as much of the different stakes and concerns that there are, with so much goodwill that people are able to work together and bend a little bit for the greater whole. And that's really hard to do when so many people feel that they're winning the misunderstood Olympics. I'm misunderstood. No, I'm misunderstood. I'm not. It's like,
that is a fascinating term. That's
Yeah.
a fascinating term. The misunderstood Olympics. Is that in your book?
No. That's the first time I've said it.
That should be in volume 2. Have you ever heard of the term oppression Olympics by any chance?
No. I've heard of woke Olympics. I think I've heard of woke.
Well, there's a lot of Olympics apparently. The Olympics needs to lock down its trademark. But this notion that like my lack of privilege is more than your lack of privilege. Like I'm actually less privileged than you, or I have more oppression than you, or to your point, I'm more misunderstood than you. Right.
And we spend so long arguing that we don't get to the actual debates and the urgent needs that we need to solve for people. So
we should launch a new thing called the Curiosity Olympics, which happens right next to the Misunderstood Olympics.
That's great.
And then you'd pit the winners of the two Olympics against each other. So this is a question from Cheryl about journalism. So Cheryl Grave, amazing leader, leads an organization called the National Institute for Civil Discourse. Do you think journalism can play a role in helping foster a fertile soil of curiosity and courageous conversations? And importantly, like, what do you think would incentivize journalists to be more curious?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. If anything, if there is an institution where curiosity should reign, it's journalism. And it does. I mean, for all of the faults of our media landscape and all of its fractures and all of its blind spots, it's also remarkable, right? What reporting is able to reveal in this country. And this is, again, where, like, go to some other countries and see how it's going over there. Like, we should be grateful every day that we have journalists trying to dig in. But there are a lot of blind spots right now. So what I think the real opportunity is for journalists to lead us in curiosity, to model better than anyone else intellectual humility, to go out of their way to make sure that opinions are being put into constructive conversation with each other in their stories, in their spaces. They have an enormous opportunity to do that. And I know wonderful journalists who are working on this exact problem right now. I mean, I'll shout out Jennifer Brandel of Harkin, Joy Mayer of the Trusting News Project, and there's many, many more. So more attention is being turned to this. What would help them the most is the thing that feels most impossible, which is an economic model that supports it. Right now, there's just nothing cheaper. There's no cheaper way to get what media needs than social media. Make it emotional, make it outragey, make it something that people identify with and that strengthens their identification so that they share it, so that that media outlet can survive in this cutthroat environment where otherwise we can't pay our reporters and everybody loses a job. So it's like that piece is tragic. But it's still true, actually, that the reporting that is most informed by curiosity and is most resonant and connected to its community is the most successful. It is the most successful. Maybe not on the national scale, but on the national scale, there's not a lot of impact anyway. It's the local journalism that has the edge here.
So this might be a little bit of a stupid question, but do you think that we as humans are naturally curious, or is it something that we have to work towards? Because it seems like your point about media and journalism and social media, it seems like we love outrage. Like there's a reason why their algorithms cater to that. It almost seems like our natural being or state is like, we like to be engaged, we like to have our fears turned against each other.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're naturally curious, or do you think that that's a skill that we have to acquire?
I think it's a skill, but I think we all already have it.
Okay.
The way to level up the skill is to level up the awareness and the intentional use of curiosity, aiming curiosity at the things you don't understand, noticing your assumptions and your judgments, giving yourself that invitation to be like, let me turn that into a question mark. What's going on there? Maybe there's another way I can approach this. I think that's really important. But I will say this, I think that one of the things I hear a lot is, man, Monica, you talk in part 1 of your book, the SOS, about sorting, othering, siloing, we're so divided, and these things are all part of human nature. So if it's human nature to divide, if it's human nature to be outraged, if it's human nature to chase dopamine lollipops on the internet, all night long, well, it's also human nature to connect. It actually is. And I demonstrate this. I do a curiosity workshop. And one of my favorite moments is I tell people in a certain exercise, okay, you're going to ask each other questions, but you're not allowed to do any commentary. Don't respond to their questions at all. Just keep asking. And so at the end, inevitably, someone will raise their hand and say, that was really hard. I mean, they mentioned this and I also like that. And I wanted to say, and I also went to that school or I traveled to that country. And I'm like, yeah, this is one of the things that gives me hope. So it's not so much that we're naturally curious or not. We naturally want to be seen by each other and to see each other. We want to mean something to ourselves and to other people. That's the thing to lean on, right? That underlying connection is something we crave. Yeah.
That's a great point. I think the notion of that underlying connection and that actually we get a lot of dopamine from being kind too. It's not like we just get dopamine from being angry. Before I continue with some more questions and just naturally sort of close this out, because I think these questions are super insightful. I just want to remind everyone that Eliza is from our Village Square team is going to be putting a link into the chat to complete a survey. It's called SKIM. It's something that Village Square and Bridge USA, our organization, piloted together. Eliza, if you could drop that SKIM link into the chat. Everybody, please fill this out if you can, because this will help us see the impact of these types of conversations. And Monica, we're holding the audience steady right now, and so I'm just going to keep asking you questions until Liz starts giving me overtime. So the next question I've got for you is back to civics tests. It seems like people love civics tests.
All right.
Should people running for political office have to pass a
civics test?
That's an interesting one.
I mean, this is good because we get to explore nuance, right? A great tactic to kind of explore disagreements is like, see where somebody's point of view would change. What conditions would have to be met for someone to actually give a different answer. So that's what I'm experiencing right now in my own head. It's like, I don't think for the citizenry that would be a good idea, but for people running for office, I'm certainly warmer to the idea. I can't give you a final answer, but I'm warmer to the idea, and I would welcome the exchange. But then there would be tough questions about who wrote the civics test. How do we know that it fully represents everybody? What if it becomes too partisan? What if it has an enormous blind spot that actually keeps us from being represented well? There's dangers. So there's something about leaving everything all open and messy that at least makes sure that nobody can conquer it or control it.
And your answer there and the fact that there was a follow-up to that question just demonstrates the value of nuance in these types of conversations. Yes. And again, I just want to remind everyone in the chat, there's a link, you should click it, you should fill that link out. It'll be really helpful to help us understand the value and impact of conversations like this. Monica, I gotta ask you a couple more questions. So the next question I've got for you is about conservatives in this work. Often, and this is I think more of a tactical question from some bridging organizations. A lot of organizations in this work often say that it's hard to get conservatives to oftentimes engage in bridge building work. Could you speak a little bit to that? And could you speak to why you think there might be more mistrust within a certain ideological camp about these types of conversations?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think my answer changes based on when you ask me. And I like to think that's because, ideas are mixing in my mind, and so let's see what we get. But today, I want to talk about trust. We talked about the media and how great journalism is. there's a lot of conservatives that would hear me say that journalism is the truth building institution and roll their eyes all the way to the back of their head, because all the ways that they don't think journalism has represented their concerns at all. And they're not wrong. They're really not. So I think the trust gap is so much bigger with many conservatives. And there's a lot of overlap with, conservatives and rural communities or class divides where there are severe blind spots that are almost embarrassing, right? Like issues like the opioid epidemic or income inequality and how it's destroyed the economies of small towns across this country don't get anywhere near the attention of the issues that a lot of urban liberals think are more important, right? And so we have enormous blind spots on this. So if I were conservative, I would need a whole lot of evidence from the media or from bridge building organizations, which, let's be honest, most of them come from universities. Most of them come from cities, not all of them, but a lot of them. And so the trust game is stacked against a lot of these spaces. And so I think people kind of, we go, what do we do? What do we do? And it's like, well, I think we have to recognize that there's an asymmetric trust challenge going on and that it is valid. And so, at Braver Angels, right, we were proud of the fact that we're able to gather folks from both sides, but it's not equal. But we have like the Working People's Project, which is all about engaging the working class. And we do forums with folks who normally never get asked to be on the mic on a Zoom event, right? And there's all kinds of different ways. It's just you have to make sure that your movement is being co-created with all the people. And I don't think that we're putting enough of an onus on ourselves on that. And that's a real problem.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Why include a certain segment of the population that seems so against democracy?
Because they're still part of it.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Like, unless that whole segment of the population up and moved, which they're not going to and they shouldn't. It's kind of like back to that question about the civics test for the citizenry. It's like, if people are crossing their arms and feeling disengaged and detached, and we are missing, and the fact that we are missing their concerns and perspectives, and right, what a privileged we I'm giving there, but that that a lot of the mechanisms of this country that talk to itself, like, and that these divisions exist because people aren't being heard across these divides, that's on us, that's on all of us. So yeah, this democracy is going to include everyone, whether we like it or not. And so we have a better democracy when we accept that, we embrace that, and we implicate ourselves in all of the ways, subtle and not so subtle, that we are excluding voices.
So I want to bring up another demographic here, which is young people, and the point that you're raising about trust. It seems like a lot of people in my generation, Gen Z, also have a lot of mistrust. We'll often describe it as, a lot of us, the lived political memory of us is 9/11, the Great Recession, the 2016 election, and the year that is 2020 with, the Capitol riots and the pandemic and the summer of the Black Lives Matter protests. How would you say we can work to reconcile that trust gap with young people and specifically trust in those conversations?
Yeah. The first thing I think of, I think a lot of trust gaps are reconciled by acknowledgement of missteps, acknowledgement of pain. And too often we skip that, which makes people feel like they don't matter, and that the fact that they see things differently doesn't matter, and that they're still being called in to participate on somebody else's terms. So when I think of Gen Z, and you just laid out this sort of terrible, I grew up, I'm Gen Y, and I grew up like the 90s were a decade of relative peace, right? So that was fun. So I didn't, like 9/11 was
like?
freshman year of college. What's that?
Did you enjoy? How was it like to be at the pinnacle of power?
Oh my gosh. Or at least of thinking that things were kind of okay, and then Columbine happened, and then 9/11 happened, and then it all kind of followed from there. But I like to think of it a different ways. That, like, there's all this pain, but so far a lot of this pain has opened our eyes. And when a democracy opens its eyes wider, the opportunity is to be a stronger democracy. So that's what I would invite Gen Z to do, right? It's all about what people have seen. My favorite philosopher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the eye was placed where one ray should fall so that it might testify to that particular ray. So
Mhm.
we need to ask, what is everybody seeing that we're missing? How can we layer the one thing on top of the other? So Gen Z has an extraordinary perspective. And if it's not being included in the power plays here about our discourse, then that's on us.
We've got about 6 minutes left, and I'm going to try to keep this as tight to program as possible because I know your time's valuable, and I know the audience is got to be places as well. So I'm going to ask you 3 other questions. So on this notion of trust and what you just said there, which is acknowledgement, it seems like acknowledgement is a persistent theme throughout your book and through what you're saying, that if you can acknowledge the missteps or acknowledge the pain or acknowledge the problem, you can get places. This person has asked a question actually about their interracial or interpolitical marriage. So I am a lifelong dyed-in-the-wool liberal Democrat from Colorado in a long-time marriage to my polar opposite, a Florida man. Until now, I have been able to find a tolerable middle ground. Any thoughts?
Oof. Well, good colleagues of mine at Braver Angels, Barbara and Rick, are in a very similar position. He voted for Trump. She voted for the Democratic candidates. And around the 2020 election, it got so bad that they actually didn't talk to each other. They couldn't talk to each other, but they still figured it out. So for a couple of days, they just wrote letters back and forth, actual letters under the same roof. They sat down and wrote letters, and Barbara felt that was a great way. She was so upset. She was so upset that he was planning to vote for Trump, that she had to get her thoughts down without yelling. And then he thoughtfully responded in those letters with love. And that really brought them somewhere. Another thing that Rick had to learn was he was treating Barbara like a stereotype liberal. She was getting very curious about him, and he wasn't getting curious about her. And when she confronted him about it, he said, well, honey, I already know what you think. I watch TV. Like, I know everything. But she's like, but that's like, even if I do have the same reasons that you're seeing on TV, you're not seeing me if you're not hearing those reasons from me. And so he learned that and changed that, right? And worked on that. So they're able to have those conversations. It's taken them some work. They've done some skills training. And now they're kind of sharing their story and passing along some of that advice. So lean on the love. I think that's all any of us can do, is lean on that love. And you don't have to solve it all in one conversation. You don't have to solve anything, really. You just have to somehow accept. There's always got to be some level of acceptance, not agreement, but acceptance that person is going to have a different opinion than you. And but can they at least understand? Yeah.
Lean on that love, and Barbara and Rick's story is a very inspiring and fascinating one. And so I think it's definitely something for the person who asked that question. And I just again want to remind everybody, there's a link in the chat. Yes. Eliza, feel free to drop that in again. Please fill that link out. It's an anonymous survey. It'll be really helpful for all of us. Monica, I've got 2 last questions for you. One is about whether there's ever a line. Are there certain lines that we should draw in these conversations? And specifically, this person's asking that they presume that it is acceptable to have boundaries and refuse to engage further with certain people or groups that have a unanimous and dangerous belief. How do you reconcile that? And do you think there are lines to some conversations?
This is probably the question that I'm the most curious about, because there's so much going on. I hear this a lot, and I think it's a really, really good and fascinating question. So, I mean, the best I can do is say that this is a personal decision for everyone. And so the red line, what everyone's red line is up to them, right? So I've been asked, well, should you expect someone who's Black to talk to someone who's a white supremacist? And the temptation is to say, no, let's not expect that. But I would also say, but let's not expect that, because we have case studies from folks like Daryl Davis. It's a very famous story where he defrocked members of the Ku Klux Klan. He's a Black man, by asking them that radical question, asking himself the radical question, how can you hate me if you don't even know me? So should we all up and do that? I mean, should we feel that pressure? No, this is an individual decision. But again, I would say all I can tell is that saying that is not satisfying. Somehow it's not sufficient. I think people want, and again, I'm just thinking out loud here, I think people want some kind of socially enforced guardrail. And I, at least, am not ready to give one, because I believe that so much is possible that that I think the individual is the only one who has the power to make that choice. The individual should not feel that they should, but they also shouldn't feel that they shouldn't from a social perspective. You decide. That's all I got for you on anything.
You've got a lot for us, Monica. Instead of asking my last question, being selfish and continuing to feed my curiosity, I want to turn the floor over to you and ask you if there's anything else that you would like to leave the audience with. You had mentioned that there was something, but you don't know if it has come up yet, and it might come up.
Oh,
but,
right. That's right.
I want to turn the floor over to you before we close out.
Yeah. Okay. I'll mention that thing, actually. It did not come up. It's about emotional labor. It's about how exhausting and laborious this work is, which, depending on who you are and what the relationship is and how much, that political disagreement is actually about you, then these conversations could be impossible, or they could be possible, or they could be very easy. Who knows? You're anywhere on that spectrum. But here's the thing about emotional labor. When people say there's too much emotional labor in having this conversation, here's what I might offer. Is that I think that we often assume that right now, when we are not having a conversation like this, our emotional labor is 0. And then when we have the conversation, it's 10, it's 20, it's 50, it's 100. But I don't think it's true that your emotional labor is 0. I think we're looking around and we're seeing how stressed out we are. We're seeing the volume be up really high. A lot of people are walking around this world like it's on fire. Is it on fire? I don't know. Or is it just warm? And we know from the research that, again, people look across the divide and vastly exaggerate. We all do. So is there room for some possibility that maybe the anxiety that we feel every day, fearing the people who disagree with us, is a lot of emotional labor every day? And that actually having these conversations will start to shave off that labor, so that the first conversation's a little tough, but you didn't go talk to a Nazi, you talk to somebody who just disagrees with you a little bit. You make these short bridges, right? And maybe it's the opposite. Maybe through these conversations, you actually are reducing your daily emotional labor. That's not gonna be true for everybody, but I think that's a complicating thing that we ought to consider.
Well, Monica, thank you so much for all you do. It's both an inspiration and a humbling experience to be doing this work alongside you. Thank you for the value that you're bringing to the world, especially at this highly divided moment. I think that we live in a democracy that is defined and built by people. And if we, the people, don't act and engage in these conversations, then we don't have anything. We don't have a democracy if we can't talk to each other. It is that simple. And with that, I want to thank Florida Humanities. I want to thank everybody on behalf of Florida Humanities, Village Square, Bridge USA, all the amazing streaming partners, the Braver Angels, the organization that Monica Guzmán works for. I want to thank everyone that's working in the back to make this happen. Liz, Leon, Blake, Vanessa, Eliza, thank you for all your work. And thank you to the audience. Monica, thank you.
Thank you, Manu. This was awesome. This was great. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate you. Everybody, take care.